Alrighty, 18th of November 2025. And in the context of this series, I'm going to be moving further into Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, chapter 2, from Phenomenology to Angelology, with the understanding that we've gained through Viveki, Hillman, Jung, about the divine double, or Socratic daimonion, Jungian anima, or Vivekian sacred second self, all correspond to what in Henry Corbin is termed angel. And for me, this is in the context of an adequate response to metacrisis and meaning crisis requiring imaginal practice, dialogical, imaginal, mindful, and embodied practice of an ecology of practices in a community of practitioners. And so how can we understand the connection between imaginal practice and angels? How do these figures, whether we relate to them as archetypes, parts of ourselves, daimons, what role do they have to play in our aspirational development, not only for individuals, but in the collective intelligence of groups, and in the designing and facilitating of culture that is able to transform itself flexibly as needed in response to a changing and chaos-filled world. And my understanding is that facility with aspirational development, symbolic participation, having some understanding of phenomenology can help us. Certainly a little bit of facility with Viveki stuff is going to help. And let's press on. I've updated my methodology a little since recording the rest of Robert Avens. So I'm going to try to just read each paragraph and see what comes up. Robert Avens, The New Gnosis, Chapter 2, From Phenomenology to Angelology, Section 1, Phenomena, Images, Angels. Quote, our previous discussion may be summed up by saying that Heidegger's oblivion of being is closely related to the neglect of the psyche as a place of being, or esse in anima, and the distrust of imagination in Western thought. So again, Heidegger talks about the oblivion of being. He talks about the way that we've forgotten the place of being. So it's there's a certain forgetting of an existential awareness that we've inherited, according to Heidegger. And he feels that that is related to our neglect of the psyche. And it's also related to our distrust of the imagination. The psyche as a place of being, or esse in anima, is not only this, equivalent to what Jung understands as the psyche, but it's also the place of soul. So So there's an understanding here, an implication that if we regain a certain facility with our own psyche and with imagination, which I take to mean the imaginal in this context, that we can actually recover a deeper sense of awareness, a deeper sense of being here. Quote, imagination and its cognates is never used by Heidegger in a cosmological sense as the poetic basis of the cosmos, or as a fundamental power of the soul underlying all other faculties and enabling us to see into the inner life of things. It's apparently not used by Heidegger that way, that term imagination. So Heidegger seems to express some reluctance to deal with the term of imagination. Why might that be? He, the first is that Heidegger doesn't distinguish between these faculties of intellect, sense, and imagination. So according Heidegger, I guess, would, through his phenomenological method, employ intellect, sense, and imagination together. What I would connect with that is that Heidegger was talking about this oblivion of being, this forgetting. And I think through Jung, I can understand that as part of that forgetting, we inherited this split between our faculties of what Jung calls thinking, sensation, feeling, and intuition. And Jung's active imagination is a way to employ all of those faculties to what Jung would call sort of dialoguing with the unconscious, getting deep back to the core of our being, right? Well, it's quite similar in Heidegger here. There's a similarity in the sense that Heidegger is trying through his phenomenological method not only to help us remember what we've forgotten, the sense of amnesis, but he's also trying to exemplify or demonstrate an integrating capacity by not distinguishing between intellect and sense and imagination, using them all together. The second reason that Heidegger might not have been attuned to the word imagination is that through the tradition of aesthetics, imagination is something purely subjective. And Heidegger feels that this kind of subjectivism has been the bane of Western metaphysics from Plato to Descartes. So he's oriented to what Viveki is calling the transjective, the idea that Heidegger's Dasein is a transjective center of awareness, not a subject. Dasein being here, it's hard to point to what Dasein means. I mean, someone should already probably have a facility with what Dasein is from the previous chapter. I'm going to continue here, trying to understand more of Heidegger. So Heidegger's opposed to the subjectivism, which he feels that we make objects out of things, and this subject and object seem to go together in this way. If we objectify things, they're always objectified in relation to the hidden subject, which we are. And so if we can be more conscious in the Heideggerian way of remembering our transjectivity, then this seems to push against the romantic tradition, which talks a lot about the imagination. So this might be why Heidegger is doesn't want to deal with the term imagination directly. Yeah, because, quote, his leap out of the metaphysical tradition compels him to avoid terms that are coined by that tradition, such as imagination. Avens thinks that Heidegger is actually engaged in what Hillman would call kind of imaginal reduction. So Avens feels that Heidegger is deeply using the imaginal and imagination, although he might not call it that way. And now I need to try and understand what is this imaginal reduction, which we derive through Hillman. Imaginal reduction is an attempt to demonstrate by evocation and description the images that are the basic givens of all psychic life, and that we can point to the non-human stratum in man only by moving through the poetic mode and by using poetic tools. Let me read that again. Imaginal reduction is an attempt to demonstrate by evocation and description that images are the basic givens of all psychic life, and that we can point to the non-human stratum in man, the no thing at the center of our being, only by moving through the poetic mode and by using poetic tools. This is a deep insight. This is, I mean, obviously Hillman through Jung, right? These symbols, and not only the symbols themselves, but what Barfield might call poetic participation, a mythopoetic way of speaking, points, much as symbols point, much as images they point. We have here the idea that the imaginal is a way, it's a kind of style that points by evoking, in describing, using images. And what is it pointing to? Well, it's pointing to the non-human stratum within us. There's a kind of no thing which is at the center of our being. And I think this is what Heidegger is trying to get us to remember, right? Is the remembering of being, aletheia, the revealing of that, the unconcealing of being, aletheic, unveiling. This idea that the self is actually a no self. There's actually a nothing, a no thing. That which is not a thing, that which is before anything, which is at the center of our being. And that images and symbols and an imaginal way of demonstrating and evoking, they point to that. And they do so only by moving through the poetic mode and by using poetic tools. Quote, imaginal reduction is also archetypal hermeneutics, based on the metaphor of depth and propelled as if by inner necessity into infinite regress. It only stops for a while at the reality of the psyche, which is itself the ultimate provocation never to stop. In Heidegger's case, we're going to witness a development, or a regress, if you like, from ontology to phenomenology. Since, however, his notion of the phenomenon is in most respects similar to what in archetypal psychology is meant by image, and furthermore, since images are angelic in the sense we're using this term, it would be necessary to conclude that Heidegger's phenomenology demands completion in angelology. That was quite a tricky paragraph. I think I'm going to move on. I think we're simply talking about Heidegger's style, and it's a phenomenological style. And so Heidegger's really wanting to move from ontology to phenomenology. And why? Well, Heidegger's oriented to the way that the phenomenon, which is in some way equivalent to image, the way that things shine forth, the way that they show themselves to us, what does this point to? What does this reveal? And Heidegger feels that it can reveal this deep core of us that we've forgotten. And the consequences of that forgetting are that we objectify from out of this hidden subject. So if we can remember a transjective center of awareness that Heidegger calls Dasein, we recover a sense for things, a sensitivity for things. And we also recover a sense that of that her senses. And there's this way where we're talking about the phenomenon or the image, the way that things appear as image. There's a way that everything is. I can't quite grasp how everything can be angelic in the way that's being implied. Avens said, since images are angelic. So we're going to continue in the hopes that we can reveal more of the connection between Heideggerian phenomenology and what Avens means by angelology. Phenomenology for Heidegger is primarily a method whose motto is to the things themselves. We get to the things themselves not by legislating the conditions under which they're allowed to appear, but by letting that which shows itself be seen from itself in the very way in which it shows itself. Okay, I have to pause and try to grasp this. This is classical sort of Heideggerian impenetrable way of the whole point of this is like if we're talking about this deep remembering, then there's a way that because because we've forgotten, because we've been cut off from the core of who we are, which is actually a transjective center, we've actually also been cut off from things themselves. And so that corresponds. We've deeply forgotten the true nature of things and also the true nature of who we are. And so there's a way that if we can, quote, return to the things themselves and see them for themselves in the way that they present themselves. So there's something about the way that we can orient to that which shows itself, that which shines forth, all the things which are around. We return to the things themselves by letting that which shows itself be seen from itself in the very way in which it shows itself. Tricky. So what more does Heidegger mean by phenomenology? It's derived from two Greek terms, phenomenon and logos. Logos. Phenomenon signifies the actual showing itself of something. It's from phanesthai, to shine forth or to show oneself. It's the shining forth of things. It's the way that they're appearing. It's not quite appearance. It's more like the way that something is presenting. Read a little to draw this out. In the original Greek setting, a phenomenon cannot be separated from the thing itself. In Heidegger's view, the becoming manifest of a phenomenon takes place through the activity, indeed through the being of the phenomenon itself. It shows itself through itself. It makes itself understood through its own being. It's just so isness. Tricky. Okay, so the insight here is that when we look at something, we can't ever see all of it. We only ever see one face, one aspect. And there's a way that science would have us regard a thing as an object that's there to be manipulated. And there's a way that Heidegger feels that if we can use phenomenology, if we can explore something as a phenomenon, that we can not manipulate or objectify in that same way. And Heidegger feels that this would be getting closer to the thing in itself rather than something as an object. And Heidegger feels that the phenomenon of something, it's appearing as a phenomenon. It's shining forth the way it appears. That can't be separated from the thing itself. So even though we only ever see an aspect or a face of something, that shining forth, that phenomenon, that way that it's appearing as a phenomenon is important to what it is. It shows itself through itself. It makes itself understood through its own being. It's just so isness. Heidegger feels that science never allows the object to be what it is. It prefers to manipulate it. I would add not only that, but also rats, monkeys, and people. Never allows the quote-unquote object to be what it is. Okay, so that was an attempt to understand what Heidegger means by the term phenomenon, derived from phenomenon, Greek. Now we're going to look at logos. Basic meaning of logos is speech, and derivatively reason, judgment, and ground. Logos as speech means rendering manifest the thing spoken about. Apophansis, letting something be seen, rendering manifest the thing spoken about. The truth of logos, its aletheia, consists in taking out into the open that which is spoken about. Truth is discovery, recognition, recognition. In the Greek sense, truth resides basically in aesthesis, the pure sensible taking in or perception of something. True, in the purest and more original sense, that of discovery, is the pure noin, as in noesis. It's the straightforward perceptual awareness of the simplest sense qualities. Such awareness can neither mask itself nor be false, but at the most remain uncognized. That didn't quite help me. So I'm understanding logos here simply as it's a revealing, it's a discovering, it's an unconcealing, taking out into the open that which is spoken about. Truthful speech. Speech which is revealing. And now Avens is going to put these two terms together, phenomenon and logos. What we get is a unified notion of letting something show itself as it actually is. Letting something show itself as it actually is. So sort of hmm, it's a combination of both seeing something as it is, seeing something in its phenomenological guise, seeing something as a phenomenon, and letting it be that, letting it show itself that way, which is actually as it is in its truth, which is what Avens calls a kind of therapy of letting us see things in themselves, in their very being. So if we move on, this concept of Heideggerian phenomenology, it's asking us to radically revise our way of thinking, which is a kind of habitual, subjectivistic, and scientific way of thinking. It's not that we get to objectively decide what things are, but that things themselves speak and show themselves if we let them be in their own manner of being. So there's a certain kind of attitude or disposition, certain way of approaching things that can let them show themselves as they actually are in their truth, in their being. So this phenomenological attitude is a kind of respectful stand in face of reality, which allows this reality to appear in its own way, where we don't dictate reality, but reality dictates us. Reality dictates us. To me, this is still dictatorship, and a little bit of Martin Buber, I and thou wouldn't go astray. But being able to be moved, being able to be impressed by things. This is not a kind of animism, but phenomenology is a means of being led by the phenomenon. And this gives things a certain power. Heidegger says the very essence of true understanding is that understanding of being led by the power of a thing, being led by the phenomenon. And according to Avens, that power that a thing has, we can understand that as the soul of a thing or the being of a thing. According to Heidegger, mana or Seelenstoff, Soulstoff, mana is being. In Jung, I think this would go over to libido, mana. In Heidegger, that's being. So when, hmm, so on this understanding, phenomenology would be a means of being led by things in themselves, and that what we are being led by is the soul of things, or you could say the power of things, their mana, which is also being led by the being of things. So what's the upshot of that? Well, according to Avens, the upshot is that phenomenology begins in a world of ensouled phenomena. Phenomenology begins on an imaginal level. So there's this way where if we're really able to be in the way of phenomenology, if we're able to do phenomenology, if we're able to connect with things not simply as objects, but allowing them to be as they are, and indeed employing the logos or invoking the logos, which we can understand as truthful speech or revealing speech. There's a way that this can help us to let things be as they are. It can clear space through which we can see things as they are in their shining forth as themselves. And when we do this, we're actually inhabiting an ensouled world. We're actually connecting with the sense that when we can allow things to be as they are, they're actually ensouled. So it's not that we add souls to things, is that we notice that things in themselves already have being, already have soul. So when we do phenomenology in this way, we connect with that on an imaginal level. Corbin expresses the same thing by saying, quote, with the help of phenomenology, we're able to experience the way in which man experiences his relationship to the world. Sorry, I need to rephrase that. Quote, with the help of phenomenology, we're able to examine the way in which man experiences his relationship to the world without reducing the objective data of this experience to data of sense perception or limiting the field of true and meaningful knowledge to the mere operations of the rational understanding. So we're able to look at the way in which we experience our relationship to the world. That comes into view. So it seems that this Heideggerian phenomenology paves the way for gnosis, because phenomenology produces the kind of knowing which is not divorced from being. So in phenomenology, the knowledge that we gain is connected to being. So it's not just about knowing in a different way, knowing different facts. It's about being differently, that our knowing and our being go together. And that's one of the qualities of gnosis. Or in this sense, phenomenology is gnosis, a knowledge that is effectuated in the soul and by the soul. So it seems to be a way by which we can relate to things as they are in their truth, in their being, as a phenomenon rather than as an object. And we see things in that way as ensouled. And when we know things in that way, when we understand in that way, we're doing that and we're inhabiting that mode of being from out of the soul. And that's what it means to inhabit an imaginal world. What do we mean by soul? The soul in Jung, as well as in archetypal psychology, is not a copy of the world, but an autochthonous reality. The angel who has no biography imprinted upon its unconscious by outer circumstances. The soul has no specific message to be delivered to the outside world. The soul is the world and the message. So the soul is what it has to deliver. And in this context, soul is like a place within that we can be from in relation to a world of ensouled things. So where we can be in the world in a way that we see things as they are in themselves, not as objects, but as they are in themselves. We not only can see things more truthfully, more clearly, there's more awareness of the being of things, more awareness of our own being, but also more soul, in that we're from the soul and toward the soul or being of things. Just for itself, there's no ulterior motive or extrinsic reason for being in that way. The soul is its own message. It is a phenomenon, a phenomenon. that resonates by itself and of itself. The soul is image and imagining. Images or subtle bodies do not reflect a borrowed light. They have their own hardness, their own innate gleam and ring. They're not reflections of the world, but the light by which we see the world. So it seems that the soul is an image, and it's an image which is imagining. The soul is imagining. The soul is that image which imagines. The soul imagines. And this imagining, it's kind of like imaging. It's kind of what I mean by this is what we mean by the term, the imaginal or imagining in an imaginal way. Well, from the soul, it's seeing things in their phenomenological guise, as a phenomenon. And that seeing things as a phenomenon is also seeing things as an image. It's that imaginal reduction we were talking about. So it's not only using mythopoesis to evoke and describe images, the phenomena, the way that things appear, but it's also seeing things as images. So to imagine is to, from out of the soul, allow things to appear in their shining forth, to allow things to appear as they are. So here, Avens is wanting to say that images are angels. And so in order to understand this, it's like the shining forth of something, the appearing of something, the way it appears as a phenomena, appears as an image. It seems to point to what it is. So if I imagine for a second that if I understand that an angel is like a divine double or a daemon, and there's this relationship between, small self and large self, or S1 and S2, relationship with the daemon. It seems that there's a way in which images are angels. If I recall that in that relationship between S1 and S2, self 1 and self 2, the symbol is the means by which there can be transformation and development from one to the other. It's the symbol that does that. it seems that in the same way, what a thing is for itself, what a thing is for itself is hidden. But what appears is a symbol or an image. What appears is an image. And it seems that that image points to the way that something is a phenomenon, the way it's partial, but the way that it's shining forth as it is. It points to that what that thing is for itself. And so this is a way of understanding that the image of something, the way that it appears. Images are angels. So there's a way that I'm just trying to understand this. It's really, really different. So there's a way that the image of a thing, its phenomenological quality, is an angel of that thing. It shines forth on behalf of it. Tricky, 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 tricky. I'm gonna go a little more. In order to make this leap from understanding images to understanding angels and understanding images as angels, Avens asks us to understand a certain hermeneutics. So there's a certain leap of interpretation which is required. It's a kind of equivalent in some way to Kierkegaard's leap of faith. It's kind of Avens wants us to leap to the conclusion that phenomenology is angelology in this way, which apparently causes us to arrive in a hermeneutical circle. And so to finish this, we're going to explore this term hermeneuin, which is turned into hermeneutics to show what I mean. Quote, Heidegger, as usual, goes to the radical sense of the term hermeneuin, that he maintains bears profound affinity with the winged-footed messenger god Hermes. Hermes brings fateful tidings from the divine. He is a go-between from gods to men, the interpreter. To Heidegger, hermeneutics has to do not with historical methods of interpretation, but with the event of understanding as such. So it seems that this kind of there's a kind of hermeneutic leap. It's a leap of understanding. It's a leap of interpretation. And Heidegger feels that this hermeneutics or interpretation, it has to do with that. It has to do with this, the event of understanding. And Heidegger talks about Hermes in connection with this. Hermes, quote, brings the message of destiny. Hermeneuin. I can't say this. Hermeneuin. I don't really. Let me practice for a second. It's hermeneuin. So Hermes brings the message of destiny. Hermeneuin is that laying open of something or exposition. Hermeneuin is that exposition which brings a message. That laying open of something. Such laying open becomes laying out or interpretation. Explaining of that which was already said through the poets, who themselves, according to Socrates in Plato's dialogue, Ion, are messengers of the gods. So there's a way that this is interpreting, right? There's a way that this is hermeneutics. There's a way that this is laying open or laying out a certain understanding, explaining of that which was already said through the poets, who in this case being Heidegger and Hillman and Robert Avens, are messengers of the gods. And Avens feels that it's this kind of hermeneutics which is required for us to understand this identity between image and angel. And then he quotes Hillman, who also speaks of archetypal hermeneutics, by which he means the study of the soul. Remember, it was the soul from out of which we understand, we know images, phenomenon, a phenomenon. So Hillman, to study soul, we must go deep. When we go deep, soul becomes involved. When we go deep, soul becomes involved. The metaphors that we believe we choose for describing archetypal processes and ideas are inherently part of those very processes and ideas themselves. the metaphors that we believe we choose for describing archetypal processes and ideas are inherently part of those very processes and ideas themselves. There is an archetypal selective factor involved in the invention of terms to lead meanings out of language suggests that the meaning is already there. And to me, this would be drawn out of the body. So there's a way that when we invent terms, when we draw out terms, when we lead the meanings out of language, that's that meaning is contained in the body of those terms. And we invent terms from out of our own body. Thinking of George Lakoff, philosophy in the flesh, and metaphors we live by, embodied cognition, and Merleau-Ponty. So there's a way that I feel that our body is this archetypal factor which leads us to select the metaphors that we choose. And so this would suggest that we talk about a certain body of understanding. That understanding is found in the body. When we understand something, we take it into ourselves in the body. But also that the understanding is already inherent within the body of text, the body of a word or of a thing. And so there's a way that it seems that this hermeneutic leap is made when we're able to draw out an understanding that was already latent within us. As Avens said, what is to be understood must already be known. There's something here that we already know. There's a lot that we already know, right? And so when we interpret, when we lay things out, when we expose through exposition, that interpretation is sort of it's an explaining of that which was already said through the poets, who themselves, according to Socrates in Plato's dialogue Ion, are messengers of the gods. And so there's a way that we sort of invoke Hermes to do that, and that Hermes is present here in that act. So then in that context, I would talk about a relationship between Hermes and the soul, because it's from out of the vantage point of the soul that we relate in this way. Both of them being images, or in a sense, angels, messengers of the gods. Okay, well, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages from chapter 2. We were talking about this connection between phenomenology and angelology, understanding what phenomenology is and how it goes together with being and seeing in an imaginal way, seeing things more truthfully, seeing things as they are, opening a deeper sense of existential awareness of the no thing which we are, Dasein, this transjective center of awareness, and that from that place, being able to see things in a phenomenological way, and that's part of what it means to inhabit the world in an ensouled way, where we see things, where we see that the appearing of things, they're the way that they are a phenomenon, it points to the things themselves, but that those images of things are angels. And the soul from which we see that, the soul from which we relate in that way, is also angelic. So there's a way, I think, of seeing from there that the appearing of things guides. And I think that that phenomenological way it guides toward gnosis, a deep kind of knowing, which is also being, which is also deeper understanding, which apparently requires a kind of hermeneutic leap of interpretation, which is concerned with interpretation or hermeneutics as the event of understanding itself, which I would connect with a kind of drawing down of the spirit of Hermes, who is apparently latently present in the content that's about him, in the body of the text, in his body of work, in the body of this work, where the relationship between our soul and Hermes, in hermeneutic terms, allows for this deeply ensouled and ensouling, imaginal and imagining way. Definitely gives things a little bit more body, gives a lot more body to things. Again, that hermeneutical circle, what is to be understood must have already been known. All right.